You left, but he still whispers your name in your silences. It appears when you lay your head on the pillow, when everything is quiet, when no one else sees. The past doesn't scream, it echoes, not in the cries of the world, but in the whispers of the soul. Rumi wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." But what if that light is trying to reach you through a path you insist on erasing? Maybe you said, "It's over." Maybe he tried to move on. But there is a kind of pain that doesn't go away. She just changes shape. It hides deep in the soul and expects you to be ready to listen. You feel this because there is something unresolved. You feel this because the cycle has not been closed. You feel it because your soul knows the past still has something to reveal, and this is where it all starts to hurt again. You may have even left the person. You may have changed house, city, routine, but when the soul does not understand the lesson, she keeps calling out what hurt, as if that were the only bridge back to herself. How many times have you said, "I'm over it," but was it enough to just smell, phrase, or memory for it all to come back? How many times have you felt that story shouldn't affect you anymore? But is there still a part of you that trembles just remembering it? You ask yourself, why does this still call to me? Why does this memory still have power over me? Why, even knowing that it's over, I still feel like I'm living it all over again? The answer is not out there. It's not in the other person. It's in what you still carry, in what you hide, even from yourself. Rumi said, "You have to keep breaking your heart until it opens, because the soul is only freed when it stops resisting pain." Maybe the past is calling you not to hold you back, but to transform you. Maybe he's not a prison, but a mirror. And in that mirror, you no longer see the other. You see who you were, who you tried to be, and who you are still afraid of becoming. Memory is a secret language of the soul. She speaks through the pain that repeats itself. She calls you not like a trap, but as a sacred invitation. The wounded soul does not seek revenge. She seeks understanding. She doesn't want to go back. She wants to break free. But how do you free something that still beats inside? How do you silence the echo of a story that never ended within you? Maybe this calling you feel is exactly that. A request, a whisper, a reminder that there is still something there that needs to be crossed, something that needs to be named, something that needs, finally, to be seen with the eyes of the soul. You are not stuck in the past. You are stuck with what you have not allowed yourself to feel. And while this is hidden, the past will keep calling you, not to drag you back, but to show you where it still hurts. And every pain has a door, every wound has a key, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about now. But before I continue, I want you to stop for a moment and feel what this message has already begun to touch within you. Maybe it was a memory, a tightness in the chest, maybe a silent tear, or just the silence, heavy but revealing. If any part of this video has ever spoken to your soul, comment below. I still hear the call, but now I'm ready to listen. Write this down, declare it, because when you name the pain, it begins to dissolve. Your comment is not just text, it's a step, a symbolic act of healing. And perhaps other souls who read what you wrote will also feel that they are not alone. And if this content touched you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel. You know this isn't just another video. It is a sacred space to meet yourself. Here, every word is meant to open doors within you that have been locked for years. Then activate the bell. Walk with me, because now that the past has started calling, it's time to respond with awareness. Let's go together, because what comes next will show you why certain pains recur and how to finally cross them. Have you ever felt like no matter how hard you try, you always end up back in the same place of emptiness? No matter how many times you tell yourself you're over it, that everything's okay, that this is another cycle, there's still something there, silently, pulling you back, an emptiness that can't be explained, but that insists on recurring. A feeling that something was left unfinished, unresolved, hidden under the carpet of the soul. Maybe you've changed your hairstyle, the people around you, your habits, the phrases you repeat to yourself before bed. Maybe you said, "I deserve better," and even believed it for a few days. But at some point, some random day when you least expected it, it all came back. Not as before, of course. It came back more subtly. It came back as a scent, as a memory, It came back as a familiar energy that suddenly fills your chest and you realize, it's not over yet. It still hurts. It still lives. It's as if there's a part of your soul you haven't followed with the rest. A part stuck in that last conversation. In that absence of an apology that never came. In that look you expected but never found. And no matter how much your mind tries to rationalize, put periods, explain with logic and cliches, your heart knows. There's something here that still beats. Something that still calls. Something that hasn't yet been heard deeply. And here's the crux of this call from the past. It's not seeking you out to trap you. It doesn't want you to return to relive the pain. The past calls, because it still needs to be understood. There's still a part of you that hasn't grasped what you experienced. And until this is embraced, the wound doesn't become a scar. It remains open, disguised as overcoming, but alive, breathing in the background of your existence. You feel this because there are still unanswered questions within your soul. Because the silence that remained after the end wasn't one of peace. It was one of confusion. It was a void that no one else could fill, not even time. Because time, contrary to what they say, doesn't heal everything. It only distances us. And sometimes, this distance is what deceives us most. It makes us believe we're at peace, when, in fact, we're only distancing ourselves from what still needs to be felt. How many times have you felt like you were living a new story, but reacted as if you were still trapped in the old one? How many times have you sabotaged yourself, not out of fear of the new, but because you were still rooted in the pain of the old? How many times have you looked in the mirror and realized that you still carried the same sadness in your eyes as before? This video isn't about the other person. It's not about who hurt you, who left, who didn't know how to stay. This video is about you. About the part of you that's still trying to understand why, even though you've left the past, it still calls to you in the silences. Why, even though you've said goodbye, you still dream. Why, even though you've moved on, you still feel like something of yours was left behind. There's a difference between overcoming and integrating. Overcoming is what they try to teach you. Forget, pretend it didn't hurt, move on. But integrating goes deeper. Integrating is embracing. It's looking at the pain and saying, I see you. It's stopping running and starting to talk to what you've been avoiding for so long. And it's in this space of courage, where you stop running from yourself, that true healing begins. The soul doesn't want you to forget. It wants you to understand. Rumi said, what you seek, seeks you. And perhaps what you desire most, peace, love, liberation, lies precisely behind this call from the past. Perhaps what heals you is what you've been avoiding feeling. How many times have you tried to silence that inner voice telling you it's over? How many times have you forced yourself to keep going even though something inside still screams? What if this scream isn't weakness, but a plea for reconnection? What if this echo is actually a sacred invitation to return to your essence? You're not alone on this journey. All of us, at some point, are called back to something we thought we'd left behind. And this return isn't always to suffer again. Sometimes it's just to finally understand what the soul was trying to say at that moment, but which chaos prevented from being heard. There's no point in changing the external scenario if memories still control you inside. There's no point in saying you're fine if, at the slightest hint of a memory, you collapse. And that's okay. It's okay not to be strong all the time. Rumi said, you were created to be real, not perfect. And perhaps your truth now is precisely this. You still feel. And feeling isn't regression. Feeling is human. Feeling is the beginning of the process. There's no shame in admitting that the past still hurts. Shame is betraying yourself every day by pretending you feel nothing. Because as long as you continue to ignore what lives inside you, you'll continue to be called back, like someone pulled by invisible chains. And the only way to break these chains is with presence, with listening, with surrender. If any part of this video touched something you've been trying to hide, write it here in the comments. I feel, therefore I am. Say it for yourself. Say it for everything you didn't have the courage to feel before. Say it so your soul knows that now finally you're ready to hear what's always been there. Inside, in the silence, in the call that never ceased. Why is it that even after goodbye, certain memories remain alive? Why is it that even when you choose to move on, turn the page, close the cycle, something inside you still insists on reliving scenes that should have been buried in time? Maybe you've closed the door on the outside, saying out loud that you're over it, that what happened no longer affects you. But inside, that door is still ajar. There's still a thread, thin and invisible, connecting your soul to something that hasn't been fully resolved. There's still a memory that hasn't turned into wisdom, a pain that hasn't transformed into learning, a love that hasn't been buried, only muffled. Do you feel like the past should be dead, but it's still pulsing? It doesn't just live within you, it breathes. It manifests itself in your choices, in your silences, in the relationships you attract, in the words you don't say. It's present when you feel anger out of the blue, when something banal destabilizes you, when you feel a weight you don't know where it comes from. And the truth is, this weight has a name, it has a history, it has an origin. This is the invisible problem, the root that cannot be seen but supports the entire tree, the wound that no longer bleeds but still hurts if touched, the emotional cycle you experience without realizing it, repeating patterns you swore you'd never relive. And all of this happens because your soul is still trying to understand what was experienced. The heart holds on, even when the mind wants to forget. And as long as there's something unacknowledged, it keeps calling for your gaze, for your listening, for your acceptance. The past doesn't call because it's cruel. It calls because it's wise. It knows that within every pain lies a message. Within every memory, there's a key. And as long as you keep running away from what you feel, life will continue to create ways to make you look at it. With new people, new stories, but always the same feeling, that something is missing, that something is out of place. And sometimes, what's out of place is you inside yourself, because you lost yourself trying to forget, because you tried to numb yourself with distractions, with shallow affirmations, with promises of strength that only disconnected you further. But real strength, the quiet, spiritual, profound strength, is born when you stop fighting what you feel, when you stop saying it's over and start asking, what is this pain trying to show me? Rumi said, you have to keep breaking your heart until it opens. This phrase isn't a sentence of suffering, it's an invitation to healing, because as long as you try to protect your heart from pain, you're also protecting it from love, from true love, from complete love, from the love that begins within and overflows outward. But how can you truly love if there are still pieces of you trapped in old stories? You're not wrong for feeling. You're not weak for remembering. The soul has its own time. It doesn't move at the mind's pace. It doesn't accept imposed deadlines. It needs to be heard. It needs to be embraced. And perhaps, what's missing for you to truly free yourself is just this: sincere listening. A moment when you stop running from the past and start talking to it. Because the past keeps pulsing not out of stubbornness but out of necessity. The need to be integrated. The need to be honored as part of your journey. Not as a mistake, but as a master. And as long as you continue to treat what you experienced as something shameful, unwanted, dirty, you will remain a prisoner of memories that should have become wings, not chains. This is where many people get stuck. They think overcoming is denial. That being strong means erasing what happened. That healing means forgetting. But it isn't. Healing is remembering without hurting. It's looking back and feeling gratitude for what it made you. It's seeing the scar and knowing, I survived. I learned. I became a more whole person. But getting there takes courage. The courage to revisit the past, not through the eyes of someone who wants to suffer, but through the eyes of someone who wants to understand. Someone who wants to release what still weighs on them. Someone who wants to end once and for all the cycle of pain that repeats itself. You feel this because there's a part of you that's still stuck in that moment when everything changed. A fragment of your identity was frozen there, waiting for you to come back and get it one day. And maybe that day is today. Maybe that's why you're here, listening to these words. Because the soul knows the right moment to awaken. And if you've come this far, it's because you're ready to take that step. The question remains, are you willing to stop pretending it doesn't hurt? Are you willing to acknowledge that there's an inner call for attention? Are you willing to open the door you've left ajar and finally see what's on the other side? If this text spoke to you on some level that you didn't even know existed, write here in the comments. I hear what I previously avoided feeling. Say it for yourself. Say it for the part of you that's been waiting to be rescued. Because only when you hear it do you begin to truly free yourself. It's not just longing. It's easy to give it that name because it's the most common, the most accepted, the most romantic. Longing carries a poetic, almost beautiful tone. But what you feel, deep down, goes beyond that. It's deeper, quieter, more sacred. What calls you back is not just the absence of someone, but the absence of understanding. The emptiness that returns isn't asking for company, it's asking for meaning. It's your soul trying to remind you that there's still something to be understood, a lesson that was ignored, a truth that was denied, a part of you that was forgotten amidst the pain. This is the cycle of the soul that returns not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. When something returns, emotionally, it doesn't mean you've regressed. It means there's a part of you that's still incomplete. Life has a strange way of teaching us. It repeats the same feelings in different situations until we stop running and start listening. The name changes, the face changes, but the pain is the same. The trigger, the fear, the silence, the rejection, it all repeats in new guises. And what do? You call it bad luck. You call it a pattern. You call it destiny. But you don't really look at it. You don't sit with it. You don't ask, what is this pain trying to teach me? The root of repetition is there, in what you don't want to see, in what was buried alive, in what was suffocated by promises of strength, by the urgency to move forward, by catchphrases that tell you to get over it, to be accepted, to be functional, to not bother. But the soul isn't functional. The soul isn't short-sighted. The soul isn't made to be silent. When it screams, you feel it. When it calls, it's impossible to ignore for long. And what you feel now, this uneasiness that won't go away, this persistent memory, this feeling of incompleteness, is the spiritual calling you've been postponing for years. Rumi said, "You have to keep breaking your heart until it opens." And that phrase may seem frightening at first, as if it's condemning you to a life of pain. But what he's really saying is that there's a kind of opening that only happens after much breaking, much detachment, much surrender. The heart that breaks expands. The soul that suffers matures. Pain, when embraced consciously, becomes a portal to what is true, to what is eternal, to what truly matters. You're not being punished. You're being polished. The past doesn't call you to drag you back to suffering. It calls you so you can finally free yourself. And this liberation doesn't come with denial, nor with forgetting. It comes with presence. It comes with courage. It comes with that internal choice to look at everything that hurt, not with fear, but with reverence. As someone who recognizes that even pain has a purpose. As someone who understands that even the bitterest tear carries a seed of wisdom. You feel this calling because your soul is tired of repeating the same script. It knows it's time to change the story. But this change only happens when you stop blaming the past, others, life, and start embracing what lives within you. When you stop saying, "Why does this always happen to me?" and start asking, "What haven't I learned from this yet?" That's when everything changes. Because transformation doesn't come from outside. It arises when you answer the call of your own pain with presence. When you stop fighting what you feel and start aligning with what life is trying to show you. And life shows it. It always has. In the small details, in the silences that bother you, in the relationships that frustrate you, in the emotions you think you've overcome, but which come back with a vengeance every time someone presses that specific point. The spiritual root of pain is this blind spot, this place in the soul where resistance still exists. And every time you resist, the pain grows. Every time you deny it, it returns. Every time you ignore it, it becomes more intense. But there is an alternative. There is a lighter path. Not easy, but lighter. It's the path of spiritual acceptance. It's not about agreeing with what happened. It's not about justifying the pain or romanticizing the wound. It's about recognizing that every emotion carries a message, and that as long as you continue to run away from that message, you'll remain trapped in the pain. Spiritual healing begins when you start listening to what your soul is trying to tell you behind the emotions that paralyze you. When you stop saying, "I can't take this anymore," and start saying, "I'm ready to hear this." You feel it because you're alive. You repeat it because you haven't yet understood. And that's okay. Everything has its time. But maybe this is yours. The time to stop, to breathe, to come back to yourself. To realize that the past that still calls to you is no longer outside. It's inside. And until you give voice to that call, you'll continue to hear its echo in everything you live, in everything you touch, in everything you love. Awakening begins with a small gesture, the gesture of listening. The soul doesn't shout, it whispers. It sends signals, and you're receiving this one now. Not by chance, not because you're weak, but because you're ready. Ready to break the cycle, ready to heal what's preventing you from truly surrendering to the new. Ready to say with all your presence, I understand, and now I choose to respond differently. If this text resonated with you, if some part of your soul felt exposed but also welcomed, write here in the comments, I recognize the calling of my soul. This sentence is yours. It's a starting point. It's the beginning of the journey. And sometimes all you need to get started is this: a sentence, a choice, a listening session. What no one told you is that what really hurts isn't the past. It's not the end of the relationship, it's not the absence, it's not the goodbye that never happened the way you needed it to. What hurts, what weighs on you, what insists on returning, is your resistance to accepting what was, your constant attempt to fight what already happened, to deny that it had a profound impact, to tell yourself it's over, when in truth, you're still at internal war with everything you felt and didn't want to feel fully. This silent resistance is the true source of the pain that repeats itself. It's not what was experienced. It's what wasn't accepted. It's not the loss itself. It's the struggle you wage every day against the truth of that loss. As long as there is denial, there will be recurrence. As long as you continue trying to rationalize what can only be understood by the soul, the pain will return. It will appear in other stories, in other people, with other masks. But it will always be the same feeling, the same uneasiness, the same knot in your stomach, the same anguish when everything seems fine, but inside something is still in ruins. Because pain doesn't go away when you ignore it. It hides, and everything that hides within the soul takes root, strengthens in the silence, and begins to govern your decisions without you realizing it. You think you're in control, but the one making the decisions is the part of you that never healed. It's the part that chooses who you're attracted to. It's the part that sabotages itself. It's the part that fears abandonment and therefore clings to those who don't give anything. It's the part that doesn't trust happy endings. It's the part that runs away from the new, afraid of repeating the old. And so, without realizing it, you remain a prisoner of a story that should have already become memory, but still pulses like the present. The hidden key to healing is simple, yet frightening. Stop running and start listening. Listen to what your soul has been telling you for ages. Listen to what that pain represents. Listen to what that abandonment awakened in you. Listen to what rejection touched. Listen to what absence revealed. And most important of all, listen to what you yourself refused to feel. What you smothered in haste. What you locked in a dark room and never wanted to open again. Because deep down, you know, you feel it. Even when you say everything's okay. Even when you smile. Even when you feign strength. There's a part of you that still screams. That still cries silently. That still carries unanswered questions. That still blames itself. Still blames itself, still hopes something will change, as if the past could return to give you what was missing. But it doesn't. It only calls you. It calls so you can finally say goodbye truthfully. And saying goodbye truthfully isn't erasing history. It's giving it new meaning. Healing begins when you stop trying to forget and start integrating. When you stop running from the memory and start listening to it. When you stop calling it longing, which is actually a request to reconnect with yourself. Because as long as you think you're missing someone, you'll keep looking outward. But when you understand that you miss who you were before the pain, then true healing begins. Because what you want back isn't the person. It's the part of you that was left behind in that story. And that's why it hurts so much. Because the past took away more than anyone else. It took parts of you you didn't even realize were gone. Your lightness, your confidence, your surrender, your laughter, your faith in love. And now all of this is still tied to that person's name, as if only they could give you back, as if only that bond could restore what was broken. But that's an illusion. No one can give you back what you yourself refuse to seek within. No one but you can access those places. The hidden key lies there, in the recognition that the responsibility for this pain, and for this healing, is yours. Not as guilt, but as power. You can reclaim what was lost. You can rewrite the way you remember. You can look at what you experienced with new eyes, but not while trying to erase what happened. The soul doesn't want oblivion. It wants presence. It wants you to go back inside, embrace what was, and say, I accept. I accept what didn't work. I accept that it hurt. I accept that I lost myself. But I choose to find myself now. And this is your turning point. This is where you decide not to repeat the same pain again. This is where you put the past back in its place, not as a burden, but as part of your construction. This is where you stop waiting for external relief and begin to build an internal rest. Because when you listen to yourself, when you embrace yourself, when you honor your pain with presence and truth, the past finally understands that it can stop calling. It has fulfilled its role. It has brought you here. But if it still hurts, if it still returns, if it still throbs strongly, it's because you're still saying no. You're still putting bandages on wounds that need to be opened carefully. You're still trying to be functional when what your soul needs is to be heard. You're still looking for shortcuts, ready-made answers, mantras that work for a while. But don't touch the root. And the root is where you didn't want to look. It's on the day everything fell apart and you forced yourself to keep going. It's in the moment you promised yourself you'd never feel again. It's in the unconscious choice to disconnect in order to survive. Now it's time to live. But living requires wholeness. It requires bringing back the parts that remained. It requires reconciling with the story you lived. And most importantly, it requires accepting that it wasn't in vain. Nothing is in vain when you choose to learn. Nothing is a loss when you choose to transform. Nothing is a failure when you allow yourself to blossom from what was broken. If this text touched on something that had been kept hidden for too long, if it made you remember, take a deep breath, feel and reflect. Right here in the comments. I welcome what still lives in me. Because this acceptance is the first step toward healing. And sometimes all the pain needed was to be heard with love. Maybe you're experiencing this right now. Maybe you're in the midst of that very void. A relationship that ended, a connection that was lost, a story that seems over, but still holds you captive. Not because of the other person's presence, but because of the absence of yourself. Because what remained there wasn't just a person. It was a part of you that you haven't yet been able to reclaim. And that's why you feel this invisible prison. This feeling that something still belongs to you in that story. As if there were a bond that, even broken on the outside, remains tight on the inside. And what holds you back isn't the memory of the person. What holds you back is the part of you that was forgotten in the midst of that pain. Sometimes we think we're missing the other person, but deep down we're missing who we were when we believed in that love. We're missing the version of ourselves that surrendered, that trusted, that still had hope. And that's why it hurts so much. Because grief isn't just about the absence of the other person, but about the absence of parts of ourselves that died along with that bond. And when those parts aren't acknowledged, the soul begins to repeat the scenario, as if trying once again to recover what was lost. You may have said goodbye. You may have blocked, deleted, silenced. You may have made promises to yourself that now is another cycle, another phase. But if there's still noise inside you, still discomfort, still questions swirling in silence, then something is still active. Pain doesn't have to be loud to be real. Sometimes what destroys you is what's too quiet, what you don't even notice anymore because you've grown accustomed to carrying it. And perhaps the worst part of all this is pretending you don't feel it. Continuing to smile, work, engage with new people, post photos, say everything's fine, when in truth your soul is still trying to understand where you lost yourself. Because it wasn't just the story that ended. It was you who broke into pieces too small to be picked up quickly. And until you sit with those pieces with patience, listening, and compassion, nothing outside of you will fill what's missing inside. You were searching for answers. You wanted to understand what happened, why it didn't work out, where it all went wrong. You rehashed old conversations. You tried to remember every detail. You questioned your choices. You looked for signs. You read hidden messages between the lines of the other person's silence. But the more you searched outside, the further you moved away from within. Because the true answer was never in the other person. It was always in what you still refused to feel. And perhaps, in the end, what remained was silence. A dense silence. That at first frightens, then tires, but after a while, begins to say everything. Little by little, you understand. Silence is the answer. Not the other person's silence. That hurts, but your own. The silence that arises when you stop fighting reality. When you stop insisting that things should have been different. When you begin to accept that there is nothing left to say, nothing to justify, nothing to prove, there is only presence. The recognition that what happened does not define who you are. What was lost does not erase what you are capable of being. And in this silence, a new conversation begins. A conversation with your soul. A conversation with the parts of you that were left behind. It's there that you begin to realize you no longer need explanations. You need reconnection. With yourself, with your essence, with what you believe, with what you desire for yourself. Because in the end, it's not about recovering a relationship. It's about recovering yourself. It's about remembering who you were before molding yourself to fit into someone else's life. It's about finding yourself again after losing yourself trying to be what someone else needed. Perhaps you're still living in this subtle prison, waking up every day with a feeling that something is wrong, even when everything seems normal. An emptiness you can't name, a longing you can't quite place, a lack that isn't of someone else, it's of you, of your peace, of your lightness, of your authentic joy, of the glow you didn't realize you'd extinguished while trying to hold on to something that was already fading away. And that's why this pain returns in cycles, because it wasn't welcomed. It was ignored, suppressed, rationalized. You tried to move on with the remains of yourself, and now all your soul wants is for you to return to seek what you left behind. Not the relationship, but your truth, your wholeness, your presence. You're not alone. We've all, at some point, left parts of ourselves in unresolved stories. We've all lost ourselves a little trying to hold on to what was already leaking out. We've all silenced pain to appear strong. But true strength begins when you have the courage to feel, when you stop running away, when you allow yourself to return, not to suffer again, but to look with more conscious eyes, with a more awakened soul. You don't need someone else's permission to end this cycle. You don't need the other person to come back, apologize, or explain everything. You just need to allow yourself to conclude within, to put an end to it with self-love, with emotional dignity, with spiritual maturity, because you deserve to be free. You deserve to breathe without weight again. You deserve to stop carrying memories that no longer serve as shelter, only as a prison. If this part of the video touched you deeply, if you felt I described something you are experiencing or have experienced, write here in the comments, "I choose to rescue myself from myself." This phrase isn't just a declaration, it's an act of courage, a conscious choice, a first step toward returning to the most sacred place there is, you, because it's there, within you, that all healing begins. And that's where we'll continue this journey. The silence you feel inside isn't absence. It never was. And it's curious how long it takes us to realize this. From an early age, we're taught to fear silence, to think it's emptiness, abandonment, loneliness. But the silence of the soul doesn't scream like fear. It doesn't impose itself like anxiety. It simply settles in, soft, dense, deep, as if waiting for you to finally stop, to listen. It's not absence, because within this silence lies an entire universe pulsating. There is memory, there is pain, there is longing, there is learning, there is essence, there is a calling from something sacred. You can call it soul, consciousness, spirit, truth. It doesn't matter what you call it. What matters is that you feel it. And maybe if you're silent right now, you can hear it, right? Not with your ears, but with your body, with your heart, with that hidden place inside you that always knew when something was wrong, even when you tried to pretend everything was right. This silence that lives within you is the territory of healing. But to access it, it takes courage. The courage to stop filling every space with noise. The courage to escape distractions, excesses, and shallow promises. The courage to no longer run away from yourself. Because when you silence the world, you discover that what's hurting you isn't what's out there, it's what's within. And that's exactly what Rumi reveals when he says, "Do not look outside for what can only be healed within." How many times have you tried to find outside what only existed within? You tried to fill what was empty within with a new love. You tried to find in other people's words the validation you never gave yourself. You tried to fill your routine with tasks, people, commitments, just to avoid feeling, just to avoid stopping, just to avoid facing that silence that haunted you during breaks, on Sunday nights, in the minutes before bed. But silence is not the enemy. It is a teacher. It is a temple. It is the only place where the soul can whisper the truth without interruption. And when she whispers, she doesn't demand. She invites. She invites you to remember who you are behind the masks. She invites you to touch your pain without destroying yourself. She invites you to stop seeking in other hands what can only be restored within your own heart. Because true healing never comes from another. It comes when you decide you will no longer wait to be saved. It comes when you understand that your salvation lies in this deep dive within yourself. There's something sacred about this process. Something that no rational explanation can fully describe. You just feel it. The moment you allow yourself to be with your pain without trying to fix it, without trying to speed it up, without trying to ignore it, something begins to shift. Slowly, silently, as if your soul finally breathes a sigh of relief, saying, "Now, yes, now you've heard me." And it's in that instant that the transformation begins. Not because you've resolved everything, but because you've finally stopped fighting what you feel. Rumi said, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." And if we understand this deeply, we realize that our suffering is not a mistake, but a portal. It is not punishment, but purification. Pain doesn't come to diminish us. It comes to awaken us. And that's why it persists. Because until you connect with that part of you that's screaming inside, you'll continue to feel alone, even surrounded by people. You'll continue to miss, even those who have gone. You'll continue to get lost on paths that lead nowhere, because you're still avoiding looking within. Spiritual self-knowledge is this path back. It transforms silence into a bridge, pain into a compass, emptiness into fertile space. When you begin to ask yourself, why does this still affect me? What is this pain trying to show me? What haven't I accepted within myself yet? You leave the victim role behind and assume the role of protagonist of your own healing. And this shift in consciousness is what separates those who merely survive from those who begin to live with purpose. It's at this point that you discover something fundamental. You don't need to heal to be worthy of love. You need to love yourself as you heal. And loving yourself includes sitting with your pain. Not with despair, but with presence. Not with pressure, but with compassion. Because no one heals in a hurry. No one transforms into chaos. Healing is a slow, intimate spiritual process. And it begins when you stop running from silence and start inhabiting it. Perhaps now, as you hear these words, you're feeling this silence unfold. Perhaps it weighs heavily. Perhaps it brings tears. Perhaps it reminds you of things you'd rather forget. But if you allow it to speak, it will show you that what you've called pain is just the surface of a depth that needs to be explored. A depth where your answers, your strength, your clarity lie. Where you are completely. The world will continue to try to distract you. It will continue to offer you quick fixes, instant happiness, 3-step recipes to overcome everything. But the soul is not a product. It doesn't follow formulas. It requires listening, time, truth. And the truth of the soul is simple. Everything you seek outside already exists within. It just needs to be awakened. It just needs to be remembered. And that's why silence isn't absence. It's the deepest presence there is. It's the space where you can finally find yourself without interference, where you can cry without judgment, where you can look at yourself without masks, where you can finally be. And in that being, in that simple being, everything that seemed confusing, heavy, unbearable, begins to dissolve. Not because it disappeared, but because it was embraced. If you've come this far and felt like this part of the video touched something that was dormant, write in the comments, "I allow myself to listen to my silence." Because when you allow yourself to, everything starts moving within you. And this movement is the beginning of a new journey. The journey back home. The home that was always there. Inside. Waiting for you to return. You are not what you lost. This is perhaps one of the hardest truths to accept when we're in the midst of emotional grief. When we still feel the pieces of something that was once ours slipping through the fingers of our soul. You are not the absence. You are not the abandonment. You are not the story that ended before happily ever after. And yet, how many times have you defined yourself by what you lost? How many times have you felt you would never be whole again because someone left? Because a cycle ended? Because a promise was not kept? But now it's time to look at this with different eyes. Not with the eyes of pain, but with the eyes of truth. You are the one who survived. You are the one who remained after the storm. You are the one who kept going, even carrying doubts, even stumbling over memories, even with your soul in silence. And that's not weakness. That's strength, a strength you may not yet have recognized. Because deep down, you still look at yourself through the eyes of someone who suffered, not through the eyes of someone who resisted. The turning point begins right here. The moment you stop seeing yourself as a victim of the story and begin to see yourself as the character who learned from each chapter, you begin to understand that the past isn't calling you to imprison you, to reopen wounds, to drag you back to places that were once painful. It's calling you to free yourself. Free yourself from the version of yourself that was frozen in that moment. Free yourself from the emotional pattern formed from the pain. Free yourself from the identity you created based on the trauma. And this liberation is only possible if you're ready to listen without clinging. Listening without attachment is a spiritual exercise, because attachment will try to pull you back to the images, the details, the sensations. It will try to make you relive them. It will whisper, what if it had been different? What if that conversation hadn't ended that way? What if he or she had stayed? But true awakening begins when you listen to these whispers and respond to them not with attachment, but with presence. When you look at the past as one would look at a teacher, and not as one would look at a punishment. It is at this point that many souls awaken, when they realize that pain served to reveal what was hidden, that loss served to show where illusion existed, that the end served to make room for something truer. And no, this doesn't mean minimizing what was experienced. On the contrary, it means honoring every step, every tear, every silence, but with awareness, with understanding, with clarity. Because when pain is traversed with awareness, it becomes wisdom. And wisdom, unlike pain, is not burdensome. Wisdom illuminates. Rumi said, "Don't settle for stories of how things happened to others. Awaken your own legend." And awakening your own legend means stopping repeating stories that no longer belong to you. It means stepping out of the role of someone waiting to be rescued and taking the place of someone who rescues themselves every day. It means understanding that it doesn't matter what you lost. What matters is what you choose to do with it now, because what you build with pain has more power than the pain itself. But for that to happen, you need to make an internal decision. The decision to no longer use the past as an excuse for your stagnation. The decision to no longer transform your pain into your identity. The decision to let go, not just of the other person, but also of the part of you that believed you were only worthy of love if you were accepted, chosen, and validated. The part that needed everything to be perfect to feel at peace. The part that still defines itself by what didn't work. This shift in consciousness demands presence. It demands that you be fully where you are now, that you stop searching for signs in old messages, that you stop interpreting other people's silences as answers, that you stop placing your healing in the hands of those who hurt you. You don't need that anymore. What you need is there, inside, and it always has been. You've just been too busy trying to find it outside. When you start listening to yourself, you realize that much of your pain wasn't for the other person. It was for yourself. For the way you abandoned yourself, how you kept quiet, how you molded yourself to be accepted. And when you start reconnecting with your truth, you understand that everything that seemed to break you was actually trying to rebuild you. That everything that left you made room for you to return to yourself. And then, you no longer need to prove anything to anyone. You no longer need to be chosen. You no longer need explanations, justifications, perfect closures. You simply accept, with ease, with presence, with that serenity that only a soul that has endured pain can feel. Because now you no longer need to run from yourself. You recognize yourself. And in that recognition, true freedom is born. It's not about erasing the past. It's about leaving it where it belongs. It's about stopping carrying it like a chain and starting to see it as ground, solid ground, where you tread with awareness, knowing that every step you've taken so far has brought you exactly where you need to be. And even if you don't understand everything yet, everything is revealing itself. Because when you choose to be present with what you feel, life begins to respond with more clarity. If this part of the video touched you in a different, deeper, more intimate way, write in the comments. I am what remains after the pain. Say this for yourself, for who you've become, for everything you've faced in silence. Because this is your turning point, the moment you stop looking back for answers and start looking within for liberation. And this is where we continue, because there's still more to be revealed. There's still more of your soul waiting to be rescued. You can close this cycle now, not because it's ready to end, but because it's ready, because something inside you can no longer bear living in repetition, replaying the same thoughts, revisiting the same memories, nurturing the same feelings, as if they still had the power to keep you alive. Because deep down you've realized that this pain no longer moves you. It paralyzes you. It no longer inspires you. It consumes you. And the soul, when it feels trapped in this cycle, begins to sicken. Creativity dries up. Enthusiasm fades. Confidence vanishes. And all of this is the silent language of the spirit saying, the time has come. The key is acceptance. And acceptance isn't giving up. It's not conforming. It's not saying everything was fine anyway when deep down you know it hurt, that something was missing, that something was left pending. Acceptance is different. Acceptance is an act of spiritual courage. It's the moment when you look back on what you've experienced and say, yes, that happened. Not just lip service, but with a silent heart, a present body, eyes filled with a truth that only those who have experienced pain can bear. Acceptance is allowing what hurt you to also reveal you. May what you didn't choose also transform you. May what made you lose your footing teach you to fly in a new way. Slower, more conscious, more whole. But why is it so hard to accept? Because accepting requires looking at your own vulnerability. It requires recognizing that you placed hope in places that didn't know what to do with it, that you gave yourself completely to stories written with question marks, that you wanted something to work so badly that you failed to realize it had been wrong for a long time. And this awareness, while liberating, is hard, because it makes us confront not only the loss of the other, but the loss of ourselves within it. And that's where many people give up, because it hurts so much to see how far we've distanced ourselves trying to hold on to someone who was never truly there. But what if I told you it's not too late to return? That even after everything, even after so much, you can still reconnect with your truth? That there's still time to honor your pain as the healing portal it truly is? Because that's what it is, a portal, a space of crossing, a bridge between who you were before the wound and who you can become after it heals with awareness. But this bridge isn't crossed in haste or with resistance. It can only be crossed with acceptance. Acceptance is setting foot on this bridge and saying, I'll go all the way, even with fear, even without all the answers, even without knowing what comes on the other side, but with faith, with presence, with soul. You don't need to understand everything right now. You don't need to be completely certain. You don't need to feel strong enough. What you need is to be willing to stop abandoning yourself, willing to stop running away, willing to listen, willing to walk alongside your pain until it no longer needs to scream, until it becomes a whisper, and then, in silence, but no longer that silence of emptiness, of absence, of longing, a new silence, a silence that heals, that welcomes, that says, you arrived home. Maybe today is the day you stop repeating the old story and start writing a new one. Maybe right now, in this moment, you're feeling something different. Not that suffocating pain, but a kind of inner space, as if the pain has opened a clearing within you. And this space, this new space, no longer needs to be filled with more pain, more memories, more longing. It can be filled with acceptance, with presence, with self-love, with truth, with silence that doesn't suffocate but embraces. You can close this cycle now, not because it ended on its own, but because you're ready to say enough is enough, because you understand that the past only repeats itself when it's not accepted, and when you accept it, it loses its power. When you look at it truthfully, it stops haunting you. When you stop hiding from your pain, it stops controlling your choices. And then, finally, you stop living in the shadow of an old story and begin to write the present with an awakened soul. And it's not easy. No one said it would be. Rumi never said that going through the heart was easy. He said, you have to keep breaking your heart until it opens. This is more than a pretty phrase. It's spiritual guidance. Because every time you allow your heart to break, it expands. It sheds layers that no longer serve you. It lets go of the attachments that kept you small. It stops protecting itself and begins to pulse with truth. And that is healing. That is growth. That is living spirituality. So now, in the silence of your present moment, choose to accept, not as someone who gives up, but as someone who frees themselves. Accept that not all stories need an explanation, that not all pain will be resolved by another, that not all closure will come from outside. Some cycles only end when you decide you no longer need them to feel whole. If this text touched something you were trying to hide even from yourself, write in the comments, "I no longer run from my pain. I walk through it." Let this sentence be a milestone, not to prove anything to anyone, but to you, to the part of your soul that's been waiting for you to say this for a long time. Because sometimes all a pain needs to dissolve is to be named, and to be crossed with courage, your courage, and it's with courage that we will continue this journey. Because silence still has more to reveal. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you decided to awaken. Because this message somehow touched your soul in a place where ordinary words can't reach. And if this happened, it wasn't by chance. There's a greater calling guiding you, a call back to yourself. So walk with me, subscribe to the channel and be part of this journey of deep, silent, yet transformative healing. Here, each video is a mirror, each word is a key, and each step you take toward your truth is a part of you returning home. And if you've made it this far, you already know how important this space is. So leave a like, not for me, but for you, as a gesture of recognition for what you just experienced, a symbol that something has been touched. The video appearing on the screen now is the next step on this journey. Watch it. Let it take you even deeper, because your soul already knows healing is not the end. It's the journey, and it's only just beginning. Let's go together.